Thanks, Shalabh, for leading this session. Very interesting talks by Urmila, Rishikesh, and Professor Srinivasan. And now, for the next session, we have a very interesting panel discussion, which will be led by Suna Akbayir. And let me introduce Suna to you and invite her over to the stage. So Suna Akbayir is a tech entrepreneur and innovation strategist. As a founder and CEO of Artech International BV and Beyond Barcode, she leads pioneering ventures in AI-driven solutions, digital product passports, and regulatory technology across sectors such as automotive, electronics, and healthcare. She will now lead the panel discussion on unlocking the power of data spaces, enabling digital public good through global interoperability. Ladies and gentlemen, please give her a round of applause. Over to you, Suna.
Okay, hello everyone. I know that we are just before the lunch session, but we assure you that it will work because we will talk about data spaces, which is a European infrastructure that you might need to know, and you are the, let's say, first minority to be able to hear about it with deep, let's say, stacks. I would like to invite my speakers, Chandra, Franck, Pierre, and Vikas and Elvi, please. We will not that much present something over the screen, but it will make you a bit more understandable what we are talking about, because it's not that easy to understand at the first sight. So maybe we can start with Chandra from FIWARE, so that he can just give you an introduction. What is the data spaces?
Yeah, hello everyone. Yeah, and I think now the chairs are arranged, so in parallel, we would be moving there. So let's not waste much more time. So I will run you through, but please focus on here, not there, please. All right. So I'm Chandra, CEO of FIWARE Foundation, which is a German-based non-profit. The ecosystem of FIWARE has been around for 15 years, creating the standardized data exchange standards and data models. I have a privilege to work with IUDX since 2019, if I remember right, and I have been part and parcel of their family, so all their employees basically treat me as if I'm working there. So sometimes they are confused also, and I'm too. But going on this, I took this role last year, October. It's exactly 1 year. I've been appointed as a CEO. So just a little bit of scorecard I give about this. What we are trying to do is a sovereign, scalable digital infrastructure, which is accessible by everybody, based on open standards, which are also accessible by free. You don't need to. What we believe is that the standard should be such that you should not even have to log in. You just search it, get it, download it, and start working on it. And that is what we believe. So we believe strongly in ETSI, providing this platform for us. We also have been contributing to BIS and TSDSI through IUDX or CDPG at this stage. So we have more than 60 components, adding every time. More than 200 showcases, different platform operators that I mean, or different applications running on it. Then we have more than 49 iHubs. 50th is happening as we speak in Spain. What does these iHubs mean is it's a local empowerment. So we also organize local training so that we train the local SMEs and ecosystem so that they can use the platform which is available. It's not enough for us to be open source. We realize that we need to also train locally. There are hundreds of open source projects which and initiatives which we run. And then more than 1,000, I think we don't know how many deployments we have around the world. And 13,000 developer ecosystem we have. So that's where we have actually a strong ecosystem. So here I will just create a data space definition. Why is it related? And then we can go forward on that. So what is the data space, why it needs, and what FIWARE could actually bring together. I'm also including IUDX here also because we are fully aligned on the stack side. So I'm not going much details in the stack, but how we created sovereign digital ecosystems at the same time, harness the data for various purposes. So I'll just put the definition, why it matters, how we contribute to it, and what is the outcome. So a data space is a governed. It's not a technical solution altogether. So it's more of a governance than a technical solution. Trusted framework of data sharing between the organizations, systems, platforms, preserving the sovereignty. So what is the sovereignty here? This word is also picking up quite much in India nowadays. Is it that keeping a full right on the data all the way from the data originator to the data owner, that anytime they want, they can revoke the access, and they can actually give access to some parts of data. Why it matters now, so we live in a very global era, so we need to exchange the data. So why it's a European initiative, why do we need to follow? Because, we are all connected now. The trade is getting more and more seamless between at least Europe and India. This connects sovereign digital platforms, systems to make the data exchange more trustable. So I need to also have a trust of, when I'm sharing the data, how it will be used and what it will be used for. And it's also not only we are talking about 2 or 3 systems here, we are talking about the worldwide seamless data exchange. So how we contribute on this, I think together with the FIWARE and the open ecosystems like IUDX and CDPG, we basically digital building blocks where people can create organizations can create the platforms and unblock the data seamlessly and also exchange the data in a standardized way, in a machine-readable format. I think this is very important because we are now talking about thousands and thousands of data platforms exchanging millions of data points. The outcome of this one is that building a sustainable sovereign and AI, I always say that when we talk about AI, we need to talk about data first. So without talking data, we cannot. So ecosystems that connect India, Europe, and the world, creating trust and new opportunities. Thank you. This is all my slides.
Thank you, Chandra. We should go for the trust framework part of the data spaces and how we make it trusted them.
Hi, sorry we are between you and the lunch, so I will try to make it to stick on time. So we had a very good introduction by Chandra about what is data space, and here I would like to give definition or introduction on the trust in data spaces. We've seen this morning that there is might be huge concerns, for example, in terms of compliance, regulatory compliance, policy compliance, the trust from the citizen, from an organization to share that data. Will I give data, sell data, and create a new competitor for myself? So the trust in a data space, I've tried to give an example or a definition. To build a secure and transparent, because a black box is not okay, policy, claims, and evidence. Those will be considered as piece of information that will be used to reconcile the policy at the time of the data transaction. So policy might be, do I grant you the right to use my data for a specific purpose, for a specific usage purpose, processing purpose? Do I allow the data to be processed on certain cloud provider? What are the jurisdictions associated with those cloud providers? The claim will be the properties, information given by the different parties. The evidence might be additional information brought from the third party, impartial third party organization, such as a certification, a code of conduct, a declaration. And then when you combine that together, you are able to what I call reconciles those information together, so reconcile the policy, claim, and evidence in a way that it fits the regulatory and policy compliance. And to create a data space, usually you have a body. So here I'm referring to a definition that is coming from the Data Space Support Center, an initiative from the European Commission. And they have defined the Data Space Authority as the set of participants that will agree on a framework to establish the governance of that ecosystem. Who is eligible, for example, to say that this is a good or a bad policy within a domain, within a vertical. And finally, because we have our specific point on who might be participant inside the data space, here we have a very broad definition. Could be an organization, a legal entity, an organization, a government, a representative of organization, a human as a natural person, but also because we'll talk here about services. And by services, I mean machines and AI agents. So an AI at some point in time will make decisions and will make decision on behalf of. So for example, this on behalf of can be considered as a policy also to be included for the data transaction. And I think that's all as the introduction for definition.
Okay, thank you very much, Pierre. All right, maybe it's worth to mention to audience that in Europe there are 4 main organizations who is shaping the data spaces technology, and we do have the 2 of them here, Gaia-X and the FIWARE. So you will have the, let's say, cutting edge information and the implementation today. For the data spaces and all those things, interoperability and the standards, how we make it, how we sustain them. Franck, would you like to continue?
Hello, so I'm Franck Gall from AGM, a small company in France, but I'm also chairman and vice chairman in standardization committee in ETSI, which is the European Telecom Standard Institute. What is quite interesting is that in ETSI you have the name telecom, so it comes originally from the telcos, but the telcos are moving because they are, let's say, transporting the data at the beginning. But, and when we are listening this morning, it seems quite simple. We have the data producer, we have some data storage, processing somewhere, and then the data consumer. Reality is much more complex right now, and Pierre was just mentioning the AI agents, and true, if you look in the network, we have data processing which is occurring in many different places. I remember it was about 30 years ago in my PhD, we were quite happy because we got a Cray 2, it may speak to some of you, which was a big supercomputer. And now what you have all in your pocket is 5,000 even more powerful than this high-performance computer. And today we are all wearing in our pocket a smartphone, which is a data center at the end. It is storing, it is processing data. And all of this is being connected. When we think about data training, AI models training, in fact, now we are deploying federated distributing training of the model. So each of these small computing things, your smartphone, this camera, and so on, they are participating in this global training. And where is the data? How the data is moving from one place to one another is the question, and one of the questions which is to be handled now by the telecom operators. And this means that when you design this telecommunication stack, you have to think about all these layers and how you are going to handle the data, and obviously not forget about all concepts we heard about this since this morning on data sovereignty, privacy preservation, and so on and so on. And basically, we were speaking about traceability of data. What is the data I'm using coming from, what is going to be used, done with my data. And this means that we have to look at a number of points and to trace the data all along the chain, knowing that the data can be composed, can be used for training. So what about my data being used to train a model which is going to provide personalized information to you, and so on and so on. So all are these aspects that we are now looking at in the standardization. This is connected strongly with all data spaces aspects, and what is interesting is it's ETSI is a European institution, obviously, but we are working, let's say, on the global level. We are cooperating. We have even standard it's common where we are working with IDX on that. So this is really a global effort to be done on interoperability. And I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank. Alvi, as the member of Indian SME in FIWARE, how do you see that the supply chain will be affected? How do you see from your perspective?
Great. So there are a couple of aspects to it. That's okay, that slide can be brought up. But so we talk about domestic supply chain, we talk about the international supply chains, right? When we talk about the international supply chains, the data spaces are important from the supply chain perspective and also from a public good perspective as well. Because you're talking about resilience, you're talking about sustainability, you're talking about transparency. These are critical for the business as well as public good. And this is where, I see the interoperability between the data spaces helps quite a lot. You take the case of Indian scenario. We have ONDC, we have ULIP, which is the logistics interface. Then we have Ayushman Bharat, then we have Gati Shakti, then we have something else. These are all very good initiatives, but individual data spaces, so as to put. If you're able to create interoperability between those two, and then like how the gentleman from BGC has spoke about the forest stack, let us say, how can you create that additional, let us say, 1,000 rupees for the forest dwellers to be able to put their produce on the ONDC using the ULIP to be able to do whatever it needs to be done. That's the power that we are able to create by creating the interoperability.
Yeah. Connecting to with that, Vikas, how the digital identifiers work in this landscape and how we can get benefit from them. Okay.
Thank you very much. Yeah, can I have my slide opened? Yeah. Back, the first slide. Thank you. So thank you very much. First of all, a special thanks to FIWARE for inviting us here and to give this opportunity. So I am the country manager for an organization called Global LEI Foundation, and I'll come to your question for sure. So probably before I come to her question, I think probably I would like to give you all a short brief on what exactly GLEIF does, and most of the probably part of the question will be answered in that. So I've been hearing a lot of things around DPI, and I also probably, we also talk probably the same language, but in a different sector, that is capital market banking. So this is probably my first conference which I'm attending specifically on DPI. So I used to attend a lot of conferences earlier wherein there was a lot of talk around, other subjects, but I was the only one talking on standards and data. So thanks first of all, and it is very interesting that every one of us are talking on different topics in different sectors, but if you look at the underlying, everyone is touching upon 2-3 important vital aspects. One is interoperability, trust, and appropriate layer within the data framework. So this is exactly what we are doing as an organization. So we at GLEIF are trying to solve something around not individual, but the legal entity, which is probably creating a very important role in the ecosystem. We are a Swiss non-for-profit organization created by the G20 after the Lehman Brothers collapsed, the global financial crisis. So it is a classic example of an ecosystem because everyone touched upon collaboration, right? Everyone talked about collaboration, and especially when we are talking about interoperability at a cross-border level. You can't probably bring something at scale or probably have a better impact unless you have collaboration. So we at GLEIF is an ecosystem which is set up by G20, created by Financial Stability Board, And we probably follow a three-tier approach, wherein GLEIF is in the middle, and we have a tier 1, which we called as the Regulatory Oversight Committee, which is a consortium of approximately 70 financial market regulators across the globe. And the third tier is probably the issuers of the LEI, which are actually issuing the legal entity identifiers on the ground. So ecosystem is something which is very important, and the government's framework which we're trying to bring into the play makes a lot of difference. When it comes to LEI, probably LEI is something which was brought in after the Lehman Brothers crisis to answer a very simple but a very critical question, that who is who and who owns whom. And all public authority across the globe came to a consensus and understood that there is a requirement to have a single identification scheme which is acceptable across the globe and people can have trust about it. So my answer to probably Suna's question, because I can deliver a probably 30 minutes presentation on this subject, is that LEI probably is something which is endorsed by many financial market regulators, and there are a lot of participation on the ground which we probably collaborate with, which are the issuers, and we are probably looking at many use cases to look at real demonstrable use cases around it. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Vikas. Actually, those intro slides and let's say, introductions are to give you a better understanding of the data spaces and its, let's say, own pillars. In regard of Chandra, I will ask you a question again. Can you redefine the data spaces in the light of those information and those, let's say, preliminary talks, and how it functionally works?
So let me put it this way. I always give this example. So I've been living in Europe, and the most of the generation in Europe actually doesn't even realize that they are living in a country, because they have been traveling. There has been a seamless travel achieved across the Europe, and I think they believe like they are traveling between the states like we travel here in India. But the biggest challenge actually is that I cannot particularly use my country ID in any other country at all. So, for example, I'm living in Finland, and if I want to go to Germany, I have to re-register everything myself. So this is a big hurdle, and this is a digital problem. This is not the problem of the governance or anything, and lack of. So the idea of this whole thing is that the data spaces should be that I should be able to use my ID card anywhere I go across the world. It's not only, I'm not talking about the Europe, anywhere I go across the world should basically have a single way to communicate this one. So, for example, one of the things which I need across the world would be a medical attention, if I need, right? So I don't need to actually have an Aadhaar card, an ID card, and a passport, and all these IDs to go around, right? So I just take an ID card, I go to the doctor, and I say that, look, I need attention. The doctor should be able to read my ID. It's a verifiable credentials if you want to talk technically, whatever in the form, electronic ID, and then should be able to get all my medical condition in whatever the country it is. That is the world I would like to see before I die. So, and I think that's what actually the data spaces enable. But I as a person actually have a lot of data, in different countries, maybe in the one country, like my salary details, my personal details, and all these things. But this particular medical information example, what I mentioned, is that they need to only know about my existing conditions or what I'm allergic to. They don't need to know about my salaries or something. But of course, the next step would be, okay, this guy needs some attention, this guy has some problem, a precondition. But then they need to see that, okay, well, is this guy insured? If this guy is insured, does the insurance work in this particular country? Then there is information, because I might be insured in some other country. So we are talking about this level of granularity, this level of data exchange, and this is a medical emergency, right? And this has to be achieved, especially when I'm not able to speak or respond. So, God forbid, I don't wish for that, but still, this could be a scenario which could happen. And this is where the data spaces play a very important role. And now, why do we on the commercial aspect side, this is on the individual side, right? On the commercial aspect side, we are on a supply chain, we are the global supply chain. A single interruption in a global supply chain is creating a havoc. We have seen that in COVID. We are still not recovered yet from that delay, and we are adding complexity over complexity about that. So how do we basically track this supply chain? How do we avoid the fraudulent money transactions on the global trade? So all of these different sovereign data lying, because India has their own data, Europe has their own data, no one wants to share the data. So how we can actually trust each other much more better so that we can share the data. And I can tell you that across the world, and I can talk about the most regulated space. Everyone blames the Europe is good in making more regulations. Even they are now thinking about how we can build trust among people so that they are open to share data. So, and the data spaces can enable it.
So, please don't step into the Pierre's field. Now I'm going to ask Pierre that, as Chandra mentioned, that how we sustain the openness and the data sovereignty at the same time within the data spaces scope, so that how the authorities and the participants can trust and can rely on data spaces.
That's a tough question. I will say that it's mostly a question about the governance of those ecosystems and those data spaces. And the governance, maybe I will continue on the question that you had before about the identifier, because here so far we've talked about the identifier of natural person or organization. But if I may know just by a raise of hand in the auditoriums, how many of you are either architect, tech lead, developers, use the keyboard before to write something? Okay, at least a third, maybe a half.
Bad.
So, good. When you talk about identifier, those identifiers must have some properties. Is it unique? Is it resolvable? What is the governance to issue them? Can I revoke them? Can I do, for example, if this is a key or related to a key, can I do a rotation of those identifiers related to a cryptographic key? And basically, the challenge is how do, as tech, develop those solutions and manage to get adoption by non-technical, if I may, so the other ones, not raising their hands, non-technical people. How do we make this bridge between the regulation and the technical stacks? And that will be, for me, the biggest challenge in the adoption, the ratio between adoption, governance, and trustworthiness. And yes, I have the technical standards, please adopt it.
Good. That just pops up in my mind that for the adoption, Franck, do you think that India, in the Indian perspective, do we see a huge interoperability gap, or are they are already starting to have the same standards like the Europe is, providing?
Well, complex question, because it doesn't lie on one standard.
Regarding to data spaces preparation, let's
stacks of tens, hundreds of standards which have to be connected one to each other and so on. And from the talk here, we're discussing on the verifiable identifier. So this is, yes, the identity card. This is one standard. We are discussing about the trust layer. How do I give you my data set in trust? So we trust each other. But then, if he doesn't know what is in my data set, he can't understand it. So he has to have an understanding also of what is within the data set. Is he talking about that share, about my health record? We don't know. So also that's this level of understanding that we need to build. So this is the data layer. And what I was talking at the very beginning is we transport all this information and so on. So if I go through all these layers, obviously it's different standards, transportation and so on. We have 5G, 6G standards which are developing, and this is really a global coordination. On the data layer side, we started, and that's where we had some previous work between Europe, ETSI, BIS, TSDSI, working on some common standards for representing the data. And now on the trust layer, I think you better know than me what is the status on India on the standardization aspect and interoperability aspect between both. We have been spending 3 days over the weekend trying to connect during a hackathon, which was quite interesting, trying to connect digital identifier from the European side, the European digital wallet, and what is happening with MOSIP and so on in India. It was quite interesting. The teams did quite some good things in the short amount of time, but still there is a road before reaching full interoperability.
But it shows a certain level of preparedness is already here. Okay, I will ask 2 more questions from my side, then we will go to the audience. I'm sure you will have questions, some remarks that you want to share with us that will make it a more interactive session here. My last questions, if there's no pop-ups from the audience, that from an SME perspective, Elvi, how do you see to contribute, how do you sustain the access to democratization of the technology development by by being the part of open ecosystems?
Very good. Before answering that question, I will share a very simple phenomena extending on the thought process of the question that you asked to Franck. India has progressed leaps and bounds on the data spaces kind of a concept on the non-personal data already. For the personal data, of course, there is a lot of regulation, trust frameworks, and whatnot. The governance frameworks definitely needs to come in. One simple example that I see is that a lot of state governments today are working on price discovery of the commodities and also the forecast of the commodities, right? Why it is important of the forecast is that if there is a variation of the minimum support price to the farmers, then there is an intervention by the government that could happen in terms of protecting their interest. Similarly, if the prices of the commodities are going too much high, the government will intervene in terms of stocking it and then making sure those commodities are available at the affordable price. This is a public good based on the data. There is no other beautiful example, and I'm proud to say that as our organization, we are currently doing this with the government of Andhra Pradesh in terms of creating this framework. And particularly if you see for the SME sector, what is important, like how Dr. Chatterjee had said, data is rich, information is poor. That is the problem not only in the government, that is the problem in the SME sector as well. They have the data, their own data, but they do not have access to the open data. They do not know where to go and get the data, right? How to utilize the data. That is the biggest challenge for the SMEs. So that is one challenge that we can definitely solve by creating the information chains, creating the insights out of it, and then generating the intelligence out of it. Because what do the SMEs want? They don't care about which data spaces, what is interoperability. They care about how are we getting a value out of this. I am contributing, at the same time I am also getting a benefit out of it. I think that is where the Indian SMEs are leading to, both on the domestic as well as the export sector as well. And that is a very good sign for somebody who is in the data spaces business, somebody who is in this business, because getting the right data, affordability is still a question mark for many, many companies. So that is the problem that we are solving, and SMEs will love that kind of a problem solving so that they can get benefit out of it.
Thank you. Vikas, my last question goes to you. Maybe it's the hardest one. How do you see by 2030 this digital infrastructure landscape in the light of with those developments?
Okay, so probably, this one thing probably from an interoperability standpoint, and if you specifically talk about India, you've already heard a lot of things probably happening at a DPI point of view. So from 2000, if you've already said, I think it's a very tough question to answer, but I think from India as a standpoint, and probably if I have to talk from my field, which is the legal entity identifier, and it is also not an Indian initiative, it is a global initiative. As I said, it comes under the G20's endorsement, and it is itself ISO standard 17442. Let me tell you one thing, that India is probably very open to any kind of global initiative, And what I hear from a lot of my colleagues which are working in fintech, which probably they have been telling me that nowadays the Indian regulators have become more than a fintech. So they are innovating more than what fintechs are innovating these days. So whatever we are hearing today, it is all coming from the regulators, the people who are sitting in the government. And from LEI space, LEI is, as I said, it's not proprietary to India, it is a global initiative. If you look at the LEI population globally, 10% of the LEIs are issued from India, which is not a small number. If you look at the governance or the regulatory support we got for this global initiative, RBI is definitely our regulatory oversight committee member, but there are a lot of foundational level support we have received in India, be it including LEI in the Payment and Settlement Systems Act, making it mandatory for OTC derivatives, making it mandatory for all the credit which is above beyond 5 CR. It is also mandatory for payments, domestic payment which is above 50 crores. It is part of the NEFT and RTGS system. Not only RBI, even our capital market regulator was very proactive in terms of including LEI for foreign portfolio investors. So you see all 11,000 foreign portfolio investors registered in India is mandatory for them to issue an LEI. So I can't say what will happen in 2030, but definitely looking at the ecosystem here, because what I personally believe from my personal experience that you can't completely turn this up until unless you have a complete ecosystem play. It is not going to work if only private sector is working in that direction. It has to be a complete ecosystem play. It has to be a collaboration between government and the private. And in India, I can definitely see that. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Vikas. Pierre, you have some additions. Sorry, audience. I was expecting that. Go ahead.
For the interoperability, because you've mentioned that, and different layer, maybe something that will also help to organize the work for the interoperability layer will be to consider this interoperability in 4 different layers. There are 2 different specifications and standards that talk about that, one from the European Commission, the other one from the ISO, and basically they could be summarized as follows. At the bottom part, you have the technical and the syntax interoperability layer. For example, do I use JSON, CSV file, YAML, whatever? What is the syntax? Is it binary, little endian, big endian, and so on? Then you move one higher up. You have the semantic layer. Semantic layer, do I have the same ontologies? Do I have the same data schema to describe something? And then we start to talk about identifier. So something that I will call a customer ID, is it the same thing that the client ID, and so on? Then you move one layer above, you have the organizational layer of interoperability. Do 2 companies have the same IP licenses, intellectual property rights? Do they share the same terms and conditions? Do they share the same terms and rights, privacy notice? And then the 4th one and the higher one will be the legal level of interoperability. And for example, here I have a question. I have no idea, for example, if GDPR and DPDP are interoperable. And before I can even exchange data between Europe and India, I will have to make sure that I assess the legal layer, organizational layer, semantic one, and then the final was the technical one. So if any of us have the question about GDPR and DPDP, I'm very interested by that one.
Thank you very much, Pierre. So let's ask the audience. Do they have any questions to panelists? No? Isn't that attractive? Oh, yes, there is one. And second one is here. There.
Hi, it's very nice interaction. This is Dr. Ashutosh. So all of this discussion, a quick thing came that data is open, right? But inference, somebody draws it. It remains as open. What is the inference sharing? Any framework is there? You got the point, right? Because data can be open, available, and can be shared. But is somebody taking some inferences? And most of the is a fuel you do that thing. So is there any framework in place, or what? How you tackle it?
Chandra or Pierre, who wants to respond to this question?
What do you mean by inferences? I'm sorry, actually.
Something I draw the conclusion out of the data, right? Suppose
okay.
this fintech data or anything, right? Which as a company, I get the data and do draw my inferences, which is used for the business and so many other things. So all those things, layer is also shareable, or any framework or any process is there?
Yeah, I think there are many frameworks out there, so I can speak about FIWARE. So there is a ready-made stack out there which you can use and connect the different data sources, consolidate and use it. Don't have to go to FIWARE also. Actually, IUDX has one framework actually. There are many components in IUDX which also can be clubbed and used and have a standardized API to be used. It depends on what are the data sources you're collecting, how are you contextualizing, are you contextualizing the data or not, are you creating a digital twin, and that means I'm talking about a data digital twin. So are you creating a data digital twin? Then what type of inferences you're also allowing people to do? That is an important point. That's where actually Pierre comes in to picture his expertise, where you need to trust the person who is asking the data from you. And they also need to have a trust on you that this data is valid and exactly getting what type of data I need. So there are many layers on it. There are many frameworks, and I think right now we need to move a bit more forward, move more ahead from the frameworks of data sharing, but how this data is being used and how it can be controlled. At this stage, as Pierre was mentioning, there are many semantic interoperabilities, and there are 4 layers of interoperability. And the legal interoperability, whether I allow this person to use the data as they want, or is it I can still control this data, and can I revoke this opening of this data? So there are frameworks which are getting built on this direction, and every supply chain of the data we are talking about, that has to be also getting under control legally.
Pierre, would you like to top up something?
I was not really at ease with the first hypothesis that the data was open.
That's also the case. That's why I was also about to ask you a question related to that one. Maybe without killing the audience, the data product definition from the data spaces perspective. Just a very, very light definition, please, because for the audience, it's a really, really big discussion still been going on. But maybe it will help at least, let's say, functional way that how we treat the data as a product.
Do you want to take it?
I can start. It's anything which relate to data.
The data, the metadata itself, I will say a good data product will enable this, the data set to be reusable, to be transferred. So you need to have attached IP policies, usage rights, maybe pricing, but that might come later and separated.
I'm just asking this question to referring the previous speakers who were mentioning this quality of the data and the dimension of the data. That is how being retranslated in the data spaces, let's say jargon or data spaces ecosystem. Should I go the second question, or are we
question
done?
there, yes.
Yes, there is another question.
Are you happy with our answers?
Looks like it is not.
Do you want to ask again? Okay. Yeah, so I wanted to, with respect to data spaces, it's essentially you're moving towards a kind of federated system, right? So my question is the authorizations, how are you treating authorizations? Like, because with centralized, it's easy. Is the authorization also going federated, or is the authorization still remaining centralized? That is one question. The add-on to that is that when you have very disparate data providers, right, like from across different countries, right, I guess in authorizations you'll have to add many more layers, right? Like there may be some regulatory issues, like I'm ready to give, but is the consumer allowed to consume, or data consumer wants to consume a particular type of a data, is he allowed to do, which countries' regulatory guidelines will be applicable in such case, and how do on top of it, how do this GDPR or DPDP, whatever, pick one of that, how does that play a role?
It's not one question, several one. Then we will forget the sub-questions.
Well, they're all related, I think. Once you start answering one.
No, I mean, you can just...
So in terms of same authorizations, when I'm talking about authorizations, that is one data provider.
Let's park here for the authorization part. Actually, Pierre just mentioned those governance, the data spaces governance level, but Chandra, would you like to continue to that aspect, or I should leave it to Pierre to this authors, because...
I think just to set the context, so we are talking also about the self-sovereign identity management and also the federation of the identity. So identity authorization stays at the same platform or a system, but this is combined with the global trust anchor, and I think that's where actually Pierre comes into picture, where all these identities are connected to the global trust anchor. So I'll leave it to Pierre to answer that one. He's much more qualified than me to answer.
So the question is who sets, not identity. It's like if I'm a data provider, I have a data, and obviously I host the data in my space, right? So who sets the policies, and where does those policies reside? Does it reside in my local system, or it goes to some centralized system? Like who do I allow to get this data? That's the question.
In most of the cases we've witnessed so far, the data product that you will have described will use a data schema, a data model. For example, W3C DCAT, data catalog. You will describe your data set, and you will attach to that data set policy rules. And within the expression of that policy rules, you can say that you require the data to be only processed on some infrastructure that has a specific cybersecurity schemes. You require the data to come to be consumed only from a participant who has a VLA or lay code. So the authorization, I will say, is very decentralized, or at least distributed.
Correct.
The trust anchor might be centralized.
I can add that a certain specific regulation also can define where data and what part of the data will be stored or will be shared and stuff. Particularly, we will discuss tomorrow for this digital product passport regime, which is related to these discussions.
Depending on the domain, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, finance domain required by the regulation of the finance domain in Europe to have a central repository of all the participants, for example.
Okay, cool.
So what was the other questions? I already forget.
Well, another question was that when a provider is giving a consent or some kind of, it's setting some kind of a rule or a policy for somebody to consume data, is the provider required to know what are the implications for, say, GDPR, or there will be an additional layer or additional check to see whether this data is consumed, like the GDPR is not violated? Like who checks that and where?
Well, I will let again to Pierre to answer this question, but as a let's say, technical point of view, it's the data provider, data owner defines the rules that how the data is going to be treated. If they will access it, or if they will visit my data without having the access, let's say, ownership, these are all possible with the, let's say, cataloging your data and overall the data spaces ecosystem. But I will let Pierre to... Or Chandra, but Pierre.
Franck, if you want to take it. So here actually there is a difference between, there is also something called a data originator and the data owner. So there are two categories. So data owner is someone, an agency or an intermediary which actually holds the data. Because not...
We call it fiduciary, yeah.
Yeah, fiduciary, yes. Okay, fiduciary. So, and because the reason why the fiduciaries are coming into picture is that most of the data owners, like for me, a normal natural person, may not know the consequences or have a technical knowledge to do that. The fiduciary is responsible for the data, if it is, it means how the data is being shared. And these policies has to be embedded into, as Pierre mentioned, embedded into the data models and the schema, and actually happens. And whoever is getting the data, the person who is getting the data is the person is eligible to get this particular part of the data or not. Because a person data, for example, can be many things. So like a medical data, salary, and all these things. But a personal core data, everything can be divided into multiple blocks. And what can be shared with the trust? So if a police is asking, then they have to give every information. So outright, because the police sometimes in some of the countries are exempted with all the GDPR. So, and if, for example, a travel agency is asking that guy, they just need to get some limited data. If a medical people are asking only health data. So the bank. So there is a different ways to access the data, and these policies has to be embedded in that.
And also, the data doesn't replace the law. I mean, organization will have to comply to GDPR or DPDP. I assume that's the same thing here. So what the data space can provide will be a trail of legally relevant proof that could be used in case of an audit, for example.
Thanks.
Do we have many other questions from the audience? Yes, please.
So not going to take much time. Just one question around data standards, right? Like with the evolution of models and training availability, which was not there possibly like a year ago, right? Like, you know, how important is it going to be to do a lot of standardizations around data before we onboard them into a platform which can then use it extensively towards building a solution? You know, like of late it has been more, you know, easy towards loading some data into a AI-ready database and then evaluate and get a lot of inferences. So what's the way forward, and how is it going to look like?
Well, I will see if my colleagues agree, but I will say these are two different problems. Here we are talking in the data space on how to share the data set in a trusted way and reshare and so on and so on. What is within the data set is different topics, which I don't know if it's even treated really in the data space standards. So that's today dissociated. What we are working on, especially within the FIWARE ecosystem, is connecting the both a bit more tightly. So also when you get a data set from me as a publisher, you're able to know about the schema, what is within the data set using some models. We are working on some which are NGSLD based, but there are some other schema which exist where you can have this level of interoperability. But I think there is also a common agreement that there will never be one standard for data sharing. That's even a door. If we ask each of us what is a door, I think we'll get as many definitions as how many people we are. Is it a wood object, something which can be open and closed? Is it okay? We have many different representations, and this depends on the usage that we want to do. That's also the consumer. When we will consume the data, then you can treat it and then republish it in a different way depending on the usage. So that's why the common model will not arrive for me. What we need are just frameworks to exchange and understand the level, so reaching to the semantic interoperability level.
Okay, I hope...
I agree.
Just to probably give a different dimension to the question, probably standardization is important. Probably how I look at from our experience, and I can give you an example of the payments industry. So if you talk about the payment industry and specifically on cross-border payments, probably there is an initiative which is led by G20, which is on enhancing cross-border payments. And if you read the paper, probably there are multiple building blocks, and one of the building blocks is having standardized data elements in the flow. Because data standardization is important, and standardization of data element at the same time, standardizing the format of the data in which it has to be shared is very important. So we can't probably share a data in the format unless we have that element already adopted in that jurisdiction. So it's important from a payment standpoint, like we are already migrating to a new ISO standard, and a lot of banks are already creating their own standard, which is equivalent to the SWIFT standard, which will be implemented across the globe. So it is important to probably, in order to have a same language, we need to not only focus on the format of data in which it is shared, but also implement a standard which is globally acceptable. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Yes, the last questions, because we do have 5 minutes left.
Somebody else? Yeah. So my question is, when I hear about the work going on in data spaces in Europe, I hear so many different organizations and acronyms. You know, there's Gaia-X, there's FIWARE, there's IDSA, I think, there's DSSC, there's, I don't know, XYZ, and what role do all these organizations play, and why do you need so many of them?
Welcome to Europe first.
That was exactly my answer. Welcome to Europe.
Welcome to Europe. I let Chandra and Pierre, since they are representing these two main organizations, to answer it. But from a point of view, it's like Europe. You know, everyone has their own approach, basically. But we are trying to make them melt into pot.
So, yeah, so you could talk about interoperability, right? Are all interoperable? Or
yeah, in a way, yes, they are. And you will hear about more.
I'll actually explain. It's a welcome to Europe again. So that's how it works there. I think the FIWARE is still sticking to the point where in the data spaces there are two layers. So one is basically the trust layer and the data exchange layer. So FIWARE is handling the data exchange layer. The trust layer is handled by the Gaia-X. So whatever the framework FIWARE is releasing as a reference architecture for the data spaces, it always complies with Gaia-X. So Gaia-X in turn also creating a policy where, or actually provision where the VLEIs created by GLEIF is basically been accepted as one of the trust identities. So it falls in their area. IDSA is creating a globalized standard on data spaces. So they're trying to align with every country so that the standards are aligned. There's a trust layer, there is the data exchange layer, and how these basically trust and all these work, like data space protocol, like when the trust should happen, when the data flow should stop, these kind of basic things. So, and the DSSE is actually a project which is started by European Commission called Data Space Support Center. So the first and foremost is the current platforms. If they need to be exchanging the data, then they have to be participating in the data space. And there are different data spaces: agri data space, mobility data space, tourism data space, and all these kind of things. So where they should basically go and participate with what type of standards, what type of adaptation they need to do in the platform. So all these kinds of it's a support for all the platforms, existing platforms, and the new platforms which is coming in. But in a nutshell, these three main organizations, which is the International Data Spaces Alliance, and FIWARE is focusing on the framework, which is basically practical, community-driven, and FIWARE doesn't do specifications or standards. But whatever the specification standards Gaia-X and IDSA is doing, we try to create a reference framework for that people, so that the organizations can implement it in alignment with them. So, and there is a feedback from the implementing community, which we very strongly take back to Gaia-X, saying that, for example, VLEI connection to the Gaia-X. So that's what that's the difference between that. Sometimes we do overlap. We try to get into many different things. That's why we were all smiling when we actually had when someone mentioned the data product. Because in ourselves, there has been enormous amount of effort and man hours has been spent of what data product exactly means in front of ISO, in sense and like standardizations and all. But I think these are all in a good way that representing all different organizations and the point of views. You want to add?
No.
He's already enough. Maybe
No.
Franck,
I can give an example of how it works. For example, the ground. We have in Europe several examples with manufacturing that are building digital twins. And the way they work, and that will be my approach for work on my daily task, will be they have a milling machine, they have a lathe. Those machines, anyone having a 3D printers might know that there is some G code to move the spindle and the rotation speed of the spindles. At the same time, the spindle is moving and carving shape within the materials. They are recording the G code on a special chipset, which is being signed as soon as the part is done. And this is creating a digital twin of the part. And then they are attaching intellectual property rights, because those parts might be manufactured by a specific company. They are attaching specific usage conditions. And this is how digital twins, for example, in the aeronautics and car manufacturing industry, are being one of the ways they are being done. And I will leave Chandra. That was the perfect answer on the most overall
Franck,
political part.
Last word.
Yes, just a point on that, because in Europe, okay, so we have these 27 countries, but there is also the European Commission, which tries to harmonize things a bit, and which initiated a standardization request to ETSI and SNELEC. So now there is some work to be being done in Sensei GTC25 and ETSI data, not necessarily to build new standards, but to look at, okay, all these landscape and saying, okay, this is the European norm for catalog exposition, this. So just picking some of the standards. So this is expected to happen by end of next year, if I'm not wrong.
I hope this session was fruitful for the whole audience. And yeah, there's still one question. Since it's a student, can we take one last question? Maybe just while you reach the microphone there, we did a very successful hackathon. So all the students, if they would like to know more about the data spaces and data spaces related technology, there is a project in PACE where Franck is also coordinating those efforts. Please follow up those news. Apart from these events, maybe Franck, you can just say a few words about that also when we enter. Please go ahead.
Hello.
Yes.
In what ways do data spaces facilitate cross-sector data interoperability without compromising data sovereignty?
Good question. How do we sustain?
Can I answer that, right? So imagine you have the data spaces that is related to the commerce, the open commerce that we have in India. You have the data spaces related to the logistics interface program, the ULIP. You have the data spaces related to the Gati Shakti. You have the data spaces related to, let us say, another few other areas which will cover the citizens. So if you are looking at, let us suppose you are a farmer and then you would like to know that where your rice, where your jowar, where your wheat is going to be sold at a much higher price. Your ONDC will tell you the data, right? So these are the areas, these are the pockets where the commerce is more, you're getting a better price. How do you transport your produce from here to there? Your ULIP, the logistics interface, will tell you. So to be able to stitch the data that is there in all of these kind of different pockets, or what we could call it as a data spaces over a period of time, you will be able to draw those kind of conclusions. So that is one aspect of it. The other aspect is on the healthcare, right? So what Chandra was mentioning, that you publish your demographic data, your allergies data, your other information about your diseases or your body condition. And then that could be utilized with your consent by a variety of fiduciaries, what we might call, to be able to give you a proper service based upon your consent. So these are the various applications. So tomorrow, actually, we are having these sessions on the DPP, the product passport, travel tourism, and also the sovereign AI use cases on the data spaces. So please do attend so that you'll get more information about it. But great question, excellent question.
Thank you very much. Time is up. If you have, yeah.
Take his permission, maybe.
Yeah.
I think we are running late and we should close the session.
One last question.
Okay, one last question, but go ahead.
I have the mic. Can I ask it anyway?
Okay, last two questions then.
Okay.
Please.
From what I could gather from the session, data space is a global data exchange with a sophisticated trust layer, and somehow all of this data is interoperable. Now, if I am a non-governmental organization, what do I stand to gain by signing up to this data space? Because the incentive scheme is not obvious to me. If I'm a non-governmental organization, why should I put in all this effort to join the data space?
Okay, quickly.
CO2 carbon footprint computation, recycling, supply chain improvement. Those are all just B2B setups that will benefit from data space.
And as data as a service based off revenue generation, you can build your startup, you can build your businesses. Because, yeah, what should you do? Why should he do?
You are company A, and the government says that you need to reduce your carbon footprint by 20% by 2028. You need to reduce that, including from your suppliers. How do you share data from your suppliers? Your suppliers might be a very small SMEs, 20%, they have absolutely no idea what is data space and so on. How do you facilitate the exchange of data? supply chain, you need to reduce your cost and having a faster time to delivery. How do you improve the shipping from one part of the world to the other part of the world?
This is also going to be a norm of the data sharing and the data economy. I would add that. Why you do that? The last, would you like?
Yeah, we are actually covering that in the tomorrow's presentation.
Yes, thank you very much. The last question, please. I'm so sorry that we gave you your hand several times.
So we're talking about standard. I mean, the question of standards came up and interoperability came up, right? Everything is tied to technology. Now, when we were in the telecom domain, where nodes moved every 5 years, these things made sense because, developing standards and things which are interoperable take time. In terms of the pace at which technology is moving now, do standards and interoperability, do these still make sense? Are we still ever going to have standards which will keep pace with technology, right? I mean, just to give an example of identity, right, which came up many times. We've still not solved the identity problem for humans. Then we got into identity for IoT. Then we got into identity for digital twins. And now we're into identity for software agents. So that small element has not been solved. How do you do it across the stack, keeping pace with technology?
Well, maybe I can start. It's a true question to keep standardization at pace of technologies. But maybe one aspect which characterizes, I think, all the people here on the scene is that we are implementation driven when we draft specification and standards. So we start usually with implementation. And if we see an issue in the implementation, then we work together to solve it, put it in the standard, and then progress the implementation. So I think most of the standards I'm working on, we also have the implementation which is running on the side. So we progress both together. So we avoid having the top-down standards which are quite good from an academic point of view, but maybe useless at the end. So more being implementation driven. But still it takes time. Good point is with LLM, it goes faster to draft standards, but it takes time.
And also we try to maybe draft the standards in a way that it's not bound to one specific technology. The work that we've done in Sensei Lake for the trusted data transaction, when we say that the proof needs to be tamper-proof, then basically this is a cryptographic signature, but we will not specify this is RSA or which elliptic curve we use. We just mandate that, okay, that needs to be tamper-proof. The identifier needs to be resolvable, but we are not going to say this is HTTP or HTTPS or anything else.
Okay, I should,
Yes, we have a full session. I think tomorrow.
Tomorrow you have
we will get a bad karma because we are holding a lot of people from the lunch. So
yes, okay. Thank you very much for your attendance, for your patience. I hope it's worth to stay here with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Suna and the fellow panelists. I'll now invite my colleague Aditya over to the stage to hand over a token of appreciation to the panelists. Yeah. Thank you, Aditya. Thank you, Suna, and thank you to all the fellow panelists for bringing an international perspective. It was very nice to hear all of you. Maybe you can join. It's okay. Thank you. I now request everyone to head for lunch. We are already running late, and I request all of you to converge here back sharp at 2:40.